excited to welcome you to a special episode of Kenya Explained. I'm your host, Esther Nonje, and today we embark on a journey of reflection and exploration as we celebrate 13 years since promulgation of our 2010 Constitution. We dive deep into the heart of our nation's political landscape. And in studio today, I am joined by amazing guests. We have the Senator for Migori County, Senator Eddie Okech. How are you?
Fine, thank you.
How is everything?
Very well. We had a session today, what we call a special sitting. A bit exhausting, but very well. Yeah.
Well, do you mind telling us what the special sitting was about today? Now that you're sitting in the Senate and we need accountability from this end.
We were just considering a number of, orders today, but I think the highlight would be the National Dialogue Committee that was passed by the National Assembly. And, the Constitution requires that for formation of those kind of dialogue committees, it has to be passed by Parliament, which Article 94 defines Parliament as both National Assembly and Senate. So we were just getting the Senate approval for that.
All right.
And then we were also approving, we were actually also voting on a division bill on PFM Act. There are a few clauses that we were amending on PFM Act, especially those that can be able to enable the country deal with our debt issues. Make sure that we can be able to start putting the country into a path that we can be able to deal with the debt crisis in the country. So we're also dealing with that.
Okay. Yeah. Very interesting, and we're looking forward to having more of that discussion. And we also have another guest from the Inter-Party Youth Forum. He is Kidi Mwaga. How are you?
Very good, Esther.
You came here and I was so excited to meet you also today.
I am excited with the work you are doing.
Thank you.
It is wonderful seeing young people putting their chest on the line and making sure that they rise up to the occasion. So yes, it is good to be here and good to see you. Yes.
Now that is the pace of our conversation today. We have the Senator here and we have Kidi Mwaga here. Juliet Nyabuto already says, watching live from South Mugirango, Kisii. Thank you, Juliet, for joining in. And be sure to send this live to as many people as possible so that you can reach many people at once. Sending your comments, sending your questions as we delve into this conversation today. It's 13 years since the promulgation of our 2010 Constitution. Did you know that? Send me your comments. Let's interact. Now, the Kenyan Constitution has certainly shaped our nation over the past 13 years, Senator Okech. Has this Constitution impacted the political dynamics in the country and also in Migori? Maybe you can tell us.
Absolutely. If you think about our country, perhaps when you look at the Constitution, then you can say we are only 13 years old. That's how I frame it. Because every country that has made progress or made strides economically, politically, socially is a fulcrum of the Constitution. And especially those countries that have explored what we call democracy. They are only democracy because they are constitutional democracies. And what that means basically is that it is argued that they tend to have better frameworks for accountability and oversight, and in terms of institutions that then make sure that resources and power in the very edge translated into service to the people can be able to get to the last mile of the community. So if you look at it from that perspective, it is actually a very good reflection that you have provoked in us, because if you think about it, since independence, 1963 up to 2010, we were using what we call the colonial constitution, which was not meant to develop Kenya. It was never meant to develop Kenyans. It was not meant to develop the country, and it was not meant to develop the people of that country. It was meant to govern them. It was meant to exploit them. So that means that even the amendments that were there between 1963 up to 2010, all the amendments, if you look at them, they all sought to advance that element of exploitation, that element of state dominance on its people. So when now we look at the constitution that is owned by the people, that has come to develop the people, we are only 13 years old. But we can also even say we are only 10 years old because after the promulgation of the constitution in 2010, it took us another about 3 years for it to start being implemented. So actually, in terms of getting the fruits, the matunda of that katiba, it's actually only 10 years. But to your question, has it really impacted our society? The answer is it has tremendously done that, because the biggest genius of that constitution for me were three. Number one, it was the idea of devolution. I think that the idea of devolution has changed in this country in a manner that we have achieved more that the country has never achieved between 1963 and 2013. In 10 years, we have made some serious progress in terms of devolution, which is why even I exist under Article 96 of the Constitution to protect that element of the Constitution, which is the devolution. So that's one of the things that I celebrate most, and actually I celebrate it even to the extent of being provocative and saying that this is where we celebrate some of our now real founding fathers, like Raila Amolo Odinga, who championed for this constitution. And then the second thing that I celebrate most in that constitution is the idea that it explored the independence of the institutions of governance. If you look at every single article that talks about institutions of governance in our country, even though we haven't reached the perfect level that we want, but compared to what we had, we have made a stride in terms of making sure that our institutions of governance, starting from the police to the presidency to parliament, and that's to judiciary, to electoral bodies, to commissions that define things like revenue sharing, to things like CRC, all these EACC, all these institutions are very powerfully independent, but we can make them better because we've also seen temptations for some different offices to actually also interfere in those institutions. Like we have seen Parliament under serious attack in post-2022 election, where some parliamentarians were still being convinced that they can go to State House and get development there, when actually this constitution reverted that, such that budget development process was brought into the House, where they can actually be able to dictate development to the people in general. Then lastly, is just the idea that this constitution more than ever has demystified the idea of presidency in the DNA of our country.
Yes.
You remember in 2007, for those of us who were in the country, we faced a serious crisis, which was the epitome of that problem of the presidency. The idea that even the Wako Commission, if you read the Wako Commission report on the Waki Commission, so not the Wako, but the Waki Commission report of 2008, it says that one of the reasons why Kenyans fought and got to the point that they could target each other at a tribal level in the pretext of a disputed election was the fact that since independence, we have always thought that public service only saves you or only benefits you if you are around the presidency. So because of that, our country faced a lot of tribal problems since 1966, actually, major 1966, after Jaramogi Oginga Odinga left government, up to all the way to 2008. So those three tenets of the Katiba have really been powerful. But to crown it all, this was the first Katiba that has given the people ultimate power. The idea that Article 1 of the Constitution puts sovereignty into the hands of the people. That the only way you get to be governed, we only get to be governed if we donate power to elected representatives or directly exercising it by ourselves. That's why you have seen things like Mandamano, where people are not okay with the power they have given the parliamentarians or other elected officials or any other government officials. They take back their power and they can go and petition any government agency in any way they want
Yeah.
that was not akin to the former constitution.
Yes.
So I wanted just to catch on those ones, but that's tremendous progress for the country.
Yeah, that's excellent. So I'm getting it from your last point. It has also reduced the power of the executive, because before there was so much power on the executive.
Absolutely.
And now we have decentralized power, and we shall come to what you're talking about. There's also strengthening of Bill of Rights, because there was limited actualization of Bill of Rights in the previous constitution.
Yes.
But the 2010 constitution has provided that an advancement of the Bill of Rights.
Yes,
Right?
yes.
And to you,
That's the entire chapter 4.
that's the entire chapter 4.
That is dedicated to that, yes.
To you, Kadi, do you think?
Kidi.
Sorry.
Kidi.
I was thinking of Cardi B. So
It's a small celebrity. Yeah.
your name is close to Cardi B. So I would say, if I miss Kidi, I say Cardi down. And to you, Kidi, I say, do you think? What are your thoughts on the progress made at the national level since the constitution promulgation? He has given us the 3 important points. But continue on that, because I feel like he has exhausted everything.
That is what happens when you bring a small man with a man who occupies an elevated position of a senator.
How are you feeling right now?
But well, I am grateful to my brother for showing up jointly with a man as small as yours truly. Esther, the new constitution has fundamentally altered our politics, especially how it is organized and how it is exercised. As the senator has rightly put it, is that you realize that there were institutions of accountability that we never had during the previous constitutional dispensation. And the Constitution of Kenya 2010 marks what you call the birth of the Second Republic. And that Second Republic has come up with certain both institutions and practices that were never there before. For instance, the beauty of Article 1.1 that the Senator speaks about, that all the citizens were constantly reminded that there was somebody called above. So that whenever the police wanted to harass people, they would come with orders from above.
Exactly.
Kenyans, especially the ones that were fighting against the excessiveness of the state, would be arrested, their properties confiscated, ostensibly on the orders from above. The Constitution of Kenya 2010, what it has done, it has fundamentally dealt a blow to that culture of impunity. But impunity, just like power, does not give up easily. Many are the instances we have seen that culture of impunity rearing its ugly head again. For instance, you remember during the last administration, there was a period we called Kamata Kamata Fridays. Kamata Kamata Fridays is when people that ostensibly were people whom we were told were corrupt would be arrested on Friday, taken to court on Monday, then the bail application would be done. The moment they would be out on bail, that would be the last we would hear of those cases. So the question is, why would you engage a country in this frenzy of activities in the name of fighting corruption when it does not bear results? So as we mark 13 years since the promulgation of the new constitution, we must remind the citizens that a constitutional democracy, as the Senate has rightly pointed out, only works when the citizens are vigilant and active. An active citizenry would ensure that constantly we hold those in power accountable and remind them that the ultimate sovereignty belongs to the people. And the elected representatives are only exercising delegated authority. Thank you.
All right.
Okay. Constitutional amendments are need-based; they're not time-based. And the provision under article, if you read all the article, if you read all article 250 all the way to 256, there are a number of amendments that can be able to come out of the constitution. The only problem is that there are those that are that what we call affect the structure of the nation. That you can't amend without going to referendum with the people. But there are those that are not substantive enough to affect the structure of the state, that you can be able to actually amend them through a parliamentary process. But to the extent that we have tested the constitution for the last 10 years, I think that it is okay for people to think about any amendments of things that have worked or that have not worked. I don't think it is too early or too late. There are clauses that definitely need to be revisited. There are issues that we've also seen in the country that definitely need constitutional response. For instance, if you look at the fight that we have seen with members of parliament, especially at National Assembly level, they have this thing they call CDF, which is Constituency Development Fund. The moment you introduce a word fund and give it to somebody, our constitution requires that you develop regulations that can be able to ensure that that fund is oversighted and that fund is accounted for. Now, when we talked about the issue of trying as much as possible to keep every institution independent, the three arms of government must be absolutely independent, and they should be independent to the fact that to the functionality end. So the judiciary must always ensure that there is justice at any given time. The executive must dictate the idea of development and make sure that it implements the agenda of development. Then Parliament, both Senate and National Assembly, must ensure that they oversight these two other institutions. Because we've got an ombudsman that is not strongly oversighting the judiciary. So the ultimate oversight role ends with the National Assembly and the Senate. Now, if you argue that CDF is being given to MPs and then they go and implement project based on CDF, what then becomes an oversight and accountability mechanism for MPs? Nobody can oversight them because they are the ultimate oversight authority. You can't oversight yourself. You can't be accountable to yourself. You see. So you see this is a contentious issue that has been there, that we keep on seeing repeating itself. We have had serious confusion around the issues of do we have an opposition in Kenya or do we have a minority versus majority in Kenya? Yes. Most people are confused about it, although this is as clear as day that we are in what we call presidential system and not parliamentary system. Now, in a presidential system, there is very clear delineation between, actually, first of all, both sides of any divide are in government. There's only minority and majority. Yes. But in a parliamentary system, there is people who are in government and people who are outside government, which ordinarily they refer to it as opposition. That is why in a parliamentary democracy, you will find that a member of parliament would also be a minister. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. Or assistant minister. So there is already these confusions, and I think that confusion is coming from the fact that for the last 2 elections that we have run, what this presidential system has forced us to see is that there is a tendency of a winner takes it all. If somebody becomes the president, they can still actually use the invisible hand to be able to control all other institutions. So for instance, right now, you know that when we went to the election, and then we came from election, Azimio had straight 174 MPs who were elected. And then after the election, almost over 40 of those were basically I wouldn't say defected, but they're basically manipulated by the executive, whether it was through buying, whether it was through promises of development that some of them have said, and then they crossed over. Now, our constitution, the new constitution, does require, because from the new constitution, then we develop other laws. So if you look at chapter 2 of the constitution that defines Kenya, it defines this nation as a multi-party democracy. From that, there is an act of parliament that was passed in 2011 called the Political Parties Act. Section 14 E of that act says, and in tandem with that chapter 2, that should you change even just your interest from a political party to another political party, you shall have been deemed to have lost your seat, and you must go back and seek for by-election. Re-election. So you're going to seek the election, therefore it's going to be a by-election in your area. Yes. How do we deal with these kind of things where the presidency seems to be very strong and still controls this kind of institutions? So these are some issues that we see that definitely need some serious consideration in terms of amendment. So amendments are always good for any progressive nation, because it's a learning process, and you're able to check whether you're making any progress as a country.
Yes, exactly. We learn on the ropes. I like what Senator has said, that amendment of the constitution is a need issue rather than a time issue.
Yeah.
And coming to you, you said it's Kadi.
Kidi.
Keep on forgetting your name. Coming to you.
You can call me my friend.
Wakili, or someone say the
Yes.
Kill Kidi, son of Manga.
Yes.
Or you can just call him Stone.
Stone?
Yes.
The concern about sound from the video, so that the issue about sound has been resolved. Paul Munyao says, watching now to you, Stone, Wakili, and all those names.
Yes.
PLO Lumumba, this was PLO Lumumba and his group, they seek to amend these areas of the constitution: architecture of parliament, executive, structured devolution, constitution commissions, EAC, community, and they noted that making an amendment to the constitution is quite a tough process. And why do you think it has to be that a difficult process? And the second question is that even if we go and amend these areas of the constitutions, are we facing a political cultural problem, or we are facing an implementation problem of the constitution?
Thank you, S. The first question, why is it a difficult process to change the constitution? Every time a legislation or a new law is put in place, including the constitution, you anticipate certain mischiefs and you seek to cure them using that new law. So the last constitutional dispensation, by the time we were coming to 2010, we had about 20 amendments to it. Of all those 20 amendments, from when you begin with the first amendment in 1964, where the country became a republic and President Kenyatta I then became president from prime minister, they were all amendments that were done in self-preservation. And when I say self-preservation, it was the preservation of the political class. More often than not, to the exclusion and detriment of the ordinary people, the sovereigns. So then, the Constitution of Kenya 2010, for instance, you remember in 1983, when we therefore become a single-party dictatorship by law, it was an amendment that was passed in a single afternoon. So then, it was imperative that coming from that history and background, the framers and the drafter of the Constitution of Kenya 2010 realized that there was need to make certain sections of the Constitution so difficult to amend, so that an overzealous and rogue executive, for instance, cannot wake up one day and bulldoze members of parliament, for instance, and amend the law at whims to serve short-term political interest. So that is why, for instance, you have been told that we have what is called the basic structure doctrine in the Kenyan Constitution. So that there are sections of the Constitution that are so fundamental that the moment you touch them, you have to go back to the sovereign and ask them if they agree. One of them is the structure of the executive. The other one is the structure of parliament. So I'm forgetting your second question.
And the second question is the constitution amendment, these areas that they have touched on that need to be amended.
Yes.
Are they? Is it a political problem, or is it's an implementation problem? As they usually say with the constitution, the spirit is willing, but the body is weak.
No, that is a scriptural verse. When Christ is speaking to his disciples, he comes back from where he was praying and finds them fast asleep.
Yes. So just to ask it, is it a political problem that we are facing, or it's an implementation problem that we are facing?
The short answer is that the Constitution of Kenya 2010 was a presidential constitution, as the Senate has rightly put it. But then remember that for 50 years, we had lived under a Westminster model, which is by and large a parliamentary model, so that our political culture had adopted to the parliamentary model. Secondly, and more fundamentally, remember that when Kenyans went to Bomas from 202 to 204 to attempt to make a constitution for themselves, they had said unequivocally that they wanted a parliamentary model. So it was until the then AG and other ministers went to Kilifi and amended that constitution to suit the then prevailing political interest. That is when Kenyans rejected the first constitution in 2005. So then let's come to 2010. That after the 2007, 2008 post-election skirmishes, there was need that part of the problem was a constitution that was vesting unreasonably excess powers in the presidency, in what we called the imperial presidency. And there was need to deal with that. So then, when Kenyans then wanted a new constitution, the prevailing political interest and horse trading at the moment almost jettisoned that constitution-making process. So to salvage it, the side of the political divide that was advocating for pure parliamentary system, because it was the position that was held by a majority of Kenyans, realized that other reactionary political interests were almost using that to sink that process.
What is the short answer, Wakili? I'm kind of getting lost because I'm asking these areas that have touched on, these areas that this group of Kenyans have wanted to be addressed. Let me bring it home. They want to address architecture of parliament executive, structural devolution, constitutional amendments, ESC community, some changes in ESC community. The question is, when we solve these problems, have we dealt with the whole constitution menace or problems thing? Or are these problems, do they dive deeper into more political problems, or it's just a constitutional amendments that we need to solve the constitutional crisis that we have?
Thank you. I wanted to give you the background, but forget the background. There is a question of the executive parliament legislative engagement or relationship. You realize that when executive is entirely out of parliament, it becomes difficult for parliament to hold executive accountable, because to summon them before parliament is that, number one, you must file a motion. A senator is here, he will tell you. So that when the executive is resident in the legislature, they are able to deal with matters when matters are alive, as opposed to when the executive is operating outside parliament. So that by the time you summon them, it is 3 weeks later, it is a 1 month later, and Kenyans have moved on. So that is number one, to enhance the executive legislative engagement and enhance accountability. What is the part that they want to amend, please?
Sorry. They also want to amend devolution, structural devolution,
yes,
constitutional commissions.
So let me speak about devolution, yes, sorry. We went to 47 counties when we were drafting the constitution. And in going for the 47 counties, we simply took what was called the Rural District Focus of 1985 and then used it as the basis under which we were going to set up our devolved model. I will tell you as a constitutional law expert that the counties as presently delineated are too small to make both political and economic sense. Because, for instance, why should you have 4 county assemblies in Migori, Homa Bay, Kisumu, and Siaya, while the issues in those areas are cross-cutting? Why do you have a county assembly in Makueni, Machakos and Kitui, while the issues in those areas are cross-cutting. So that, for instance, why don't we have a county assembly in Kisumu? And then, so that all the, what you call the county assemblies there, meet in Kisumu and discuss their issues there. Number one, we will remove the number of MCAs from 1450 plus the nominated ones to about less than 400. That way we shall have dealt with the question of wage bill. So yes, there is still work to be done in the devolution area, so that when we say we go back to say 12 regions, we have the 8 regions as they were, we have South Rift and North Rift, for instance. I think that would make more economic sense. So yes, there is still work to be done in those areas. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Wakili. Talk to me, ladies and gentlemen. Do you believe that when these constitutional problems, can they solve political, cultural problems that we face in Kenya? And to you, Senator, again, what strategies do you believe should be employed to address the challenges that still persist 13 years after the constitutional enactment? Because we've seen a few challenges here and there. For example, with devolution, there's no county has ever achieved its collection of revenue targets. There's still problems with delayed disbursement of funds. There's still problems with the implementation of Chapter 6 of the Constitution, the 2/3 gender rule. So what strategies should be employed to address these challenges 13 years after?
First of all, if you don't mind, I just wanted to point to 2 points on the question you have asked about these voices that have come to talk about constitutional amendments. I want to caution them that do not champion constitutional amendments, one, to meet selfish gains.
Are we sure they're selfish gains?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna emphasize on what I mean by that, because you asked the difference between whether this is a need-based or is a political process. And political process, I would get it from what you're talking about, that political basically means interest. Are there some interests that are dictating or informing the urge for this constitutionality, or are there needs that are intrinsic need to the people that are informing this constitutional amendment process?
They argued it as a time-based.
And that's what I'm saying. I said I'd already debunked the question of time. It's not an issue of time. It's an issue of it's an issue of need. But the reason why I'm saying that we be cautious as a country to be able to not make a constitutional amendment issue an absolute personal interest problems is because then you'll be attempting to actually legislate individual behaviors. This is something I'm cautioning the country.
What if you cannot all those signatures they're going to get?
It doesn't matter. People? Getting the signatures is an issue of strategy, is an issue of how well you talk to the people. The issue here is, the fundamental issue here is, if you try to legislate bad behavior of the political class in this country, then you will never achieve the end of the signature of the Constitution. Let me give you an example of this, how this manifests very fast before I go to your question. You know, Chapter 10 of the Constitution is one of the most elaborate chapters on the kind of character of leaders that we must have and on the kind of values that we must espouse to as a nation. The question is, are people responding to individuals who have not been able to live to that expectation of that chapter? Or are people responding to things that are substantive? You see, for instance, if you say you want to go and legislate and change the basic structure of devolution, what are you trying to talk about? For instance, my brother here, I'll push back very humbly and say, the only way you interfere with the devolved units that we have is only if you add them to be more. Okay, honestly, because if you are saying that you want now to collapse some of them, then you are being not sensitive to the fact that the fundamental purpose of devolution in any country that you go to the world is an attempt to make sure that power and resources is decentralized to the best level to the people. So I'm a champion that if you are going to change any structure of devolution, even if you're going to make Kuria West and Kuria East to be counties, give them county. If you're going to make Sabot people, because the more you decentralize these units, the more you are able to bring resources and power to the people. And by the way, go and read something called Schedule 4 of the Constitution. Schedule 4 of the Constitution has developed some critical functions. I want to take, for instance, one that is one that's what life bearing called health. Let me just take health, for instance. Health, the only functions that have been left with the national government, okay, are two. One is policy and research, informing policy as matters national health issues. And then two is informing what we call the running of national referral hospitals. The rest of anything that we hear about health, including ambulance management, okay, has been completely devolved to the counties. Then what happens during budget making process, which is why I'm telling you that you cannot legislate bad behavior. During budget making process, in this budget that we just passed, the national government, okay, then the Ministry of Health is given over 111 billion. And then counties are given an average of about 600 to 700 million each. What does that mean? That the total amount that you're given to counties is less than 45 billion. And the national government that has got only two functions, you have given them over 111 billion. To do what? If you come to Nairobi, for instance, Sakaja, who is the governor here, has to oversee a total of 164 health facilities without budget. And then if you come to Nairobi, how many national referral hospitals are there in Nairobi? Less than 2 that we know of. Okay? So how is then Sakaja supposed to give service delivery to the people of Nairobi? So if you come to start interfering with the structure of service delivery to the people, you are going about it wrong. And I can tell you, that's what I'm telling you, that if you go the way of personal interest, that people have got just bad manners in terms of wanting to benefit and enterprise from being in government, that constitutional amendment process will fail. But if it's an intrinsic good, it's an intrinsic good, like what do we do with somebody who has run for election and controls 50% of the population? Exactly. That's a valid point, okay? Because then you can easily end up, because of that bad behavior, you can easily end up going back to the problems we're trying to solve of having a public service that is completely unaudited and favors different tribes. And we have seen utterances like of the vice president, although I should not discuss individually in this show, saying that if you do not vote for me, I have got no business including you in my company. So they start commodifying the state and start commodifying votes. So that means that you can end up having an executive that negates an entire half of the population. And by the way, as I finish, these are not things that are very far away. Because in 1965, there's something called Section Paper Number 10, if you can remember, Wakili. Section Paper Number 10 was an executive decision that the presidency chose to say that there are 14 regions in this country that in his own assessment, and the assessment of the executive then, that did not have any economic value to participate in our national building, such that they were negated completely in matter of development, in matter of everything. That's why you find that you can go to somewhere like Turkana, and a lady who is in Turkana today is 50 times highly likely to die from pregnancy because they cannot access hospital as compared to a lady in Nyeri. These things happen. So those substantive issues that are need-based must then be solved. But to your question, how do we solve these issues? I think that the rule of law is something that we must actually stamp our feet on. And the good thing about this constitution is that it gives the people power to ensure that you can actually stamp your feet on the issue of rule of law. Because even if you legislate and redo the constitution, if people don't adhere to the rule of law, we will still have these problems where you hear politicians go and lie to people in broad daylight. And then when they go to government, they start enterprising, and then they don't solve any problems of the people. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Senator. Kavuli Masi says, tuned in from Western Gishu County, thank you. Mockingbird says, sound echo. Now, I'm sure the sound is now working very well. So sending your comments, people sending your questions, let's interact in this live discussion. To you, Wakili, we have seen coming to Ruto's style of leadership.
And I've pushed it back a little bit, but that's okay.
Oh, it's okay.
No, not yet.
And I'm so tempted to say my side of things, but I can't take all the way to be the moderator of the discussion. But now coming to, we look at Ruto's mode of presidency. We've seen him trooping around the countries, visiting different places. Right now he's in Vihiga, and even opposition leaders are coming to him, asking for development. And now, looking at that, some people want to opine that he's using the Moise type of presidency, rather than Kibaki, who used to sit in State House and let his technocrats do the thing. We are together until there. Now, looking at that, what do you think about coming to equitable and fair share of national resources and development? How is that going to be actualized in this government when we have instances like this, that people have even opined that he's already in a campaign mode?
Do you have the problem with the president visiting regions, or you have a problem with his style of management?
Both.
Let me first respond to the question of counties. My brother seems to suggest that we need to even break our devolved units further. The question is, breaking the devolved units further, will it make political sense? Will it make economic sense? So that if you say you have a county called Kuria West,
Kuria in general.
I mean, Kuria as a county.
Yes.
So why do you say remove it from Migori? And then you realize that the functions devolved. So will Kuria as a county be able to generate sufficient revenue then to take care of itself before it receives the share from the national exchequer? So I think that in regards to the question of the counties, my brother, there is something called the doctrine of subsidiarity. The doctrine